Good morning, and welcome to this morning's Sunday Spotlight. It's Easter Sunday. This morning I have you at a favorite vantage point that overlooks the Whitehall Valley here. And I think sometimes in life it's important to slow down and take a moment to consider what's happening around us. I want to share a few thoughts with you regarding that today in our Esther series. This is part 5. Here is this week's big question. Have you ever intentionally restrained yourself in certain situations, maybe in actions or words? I'd like to encourage you to talk amongst your family members, maybe even call a friend and discuss this. Also, you can comment on the post below, and I'd love to interact with you. Sometimes holding back our response, it can really lighten the moment or in a tense situation, and it can keep a matter from blowing up quickly. Patience isn't always the virtue we turn to when the pressure's on. Sometimes I think in our weakness, our character is revealed as it's tested, and also the power of the tongue. James 3:6 says, "The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body and sets the whole course of one's life and is itself on fire by hell." I know this to be true personally, and in hindsight, there are times in my life when I could have bit or bridled my tongue better. How about you? Time and time again, life presents us with these types of challenges. And today is no different. With so many of us living in confinement, our nerves can be tested easily. But hasn't life always shown this to be true? When we look at Esther and Haman in particular, they display opposing or opposite characteristic traits in their respective lives. She employed patience and caution, while Haman was hasty and he was easily agitated. When I read the Bible, my tendency often is to assess the different participants and maybe glean what kind of lessons that I can learn from their victories or their mistakes. Many of us probably do this often in our day-to-day lives. We watch those around us. There's a general consensus shared by Esther in her heroism. Despite the odds, the custom, and the perils of that day, she is a person that we could really look up to. Every Jew in that region was threatened by death, and she paused in the middle of that panic and she began to make an appeal to her king. She sat down with the king and Haman. Haman happened to be the true instigator of this entire deadly plot. Her intent wasn't to create a gotcha moment, but it was a moment for God to allow his plans to succeed. In like fashion, we see Haman's character revealed as well. Esther chapter 5, verse 9 through 13, we read this in the Bible. Haman went out that day happy and high in spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with anger and rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, and he went home. Calling together all his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways that the king had honored him, and how he elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to this banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. For a brief moment, Haman bites his tongue in this situation when he saw Mordecai at the temple gates. But that didn't actually last very long, as he pranced home and he invited a bunch of friends over, and he began to just simply gloat in his own personal accomplishments. This man was definitely full of himself, and he literally hated Mordecai. Here is life lesson number 8 in our series. Self-promotion is temporary, while humility is eternal. You see, God is always working in the affairs of mankind. We don't always see it, but He is. God allows us to make decisions, and we act in our own character. All of this falls under God's sovereignty. The great preacher D.L. Moody said, "God sends no one away empty except those who are full of themselves." Haman's pride, it was over the top, whereas Esther, she was patient. She patiently waited and allowed time for things to unfold in these circumstances. For a moment, I want you to consider this in terms of a pendulum. You see, we'd have humility at the center, and we'd have pride at one end and self-pity at the other. At both ends, there can be this grip of self-centeredness which can take place, and it's very dangerous. So balance is important. Humility, it isn't about necessarily putting oneself down, but it's actually about thinking about others. Esther, she wasn't trying to save her own neck in this situation. She was actually putting her life on the line. And she was risking her life for tens of thousands, maybe even more Jews. She was thinking of others. Haman's concern, it was completely selfish, and that was very misguided. You see, this is a balancing act between excessive pride and self-pity. And it's important that we are mindful of certain Bible verses. Here's a few I'd like to share with you. Proverbs 11:2 reads, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." Also over in Proverbs 27, verse 1 through 2, we see these words, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what the day may bring forth. Let another praise you, not with your own mouths, someone else, and not your own lips." Here are a few points I would like you to consider today. Refrain and be patient. Our gut reaction when facing peril or difficulty is to jump. This is especially true in our words. Notice that Esther, she didn't defend herself or her people at this immediate threat that was taking place. She held back, and that was godly wisdom on her part. Haman, on the other hand, he was quick to sing his own praises, and he was even more boastful in all of this. Number 2, when dealing with capricious people, trust God to make things right. When times are difficult and the pressure is on, we need to rely on God even more. Trusting God isn't just a cliche or a way to just simply feel better. Trusting God is a way of everyday life. Understand that God, He can soften hearts and He can change the course of direction of certain situations. Most often, He is doing some of the very work even in our own lives as we learn to trust Him. We see this again in Esther. She could have battled Haman over this dinner with the king, and she chose not to. As the matter unfolds, Haman's pride became his very own downfall. This Easter morning, I'm reminded of another point in history when pride and arrogance seemingly had won the day. Jesus was just crucified on the cross. He was beaten brutally, and his body was sealed into a borrowed tomb. The King of the Jews was dead, and all of hell and Satan, they roared in victory. For 3 days, defeat and gloom settled in Jerusalem and in all the hearts of those Christians who were mourning. Then, on Easter morning, not only did the sun rise, but Jesus rose from the dead, just as He said He would. That event changed history. Satan, he shook in fear, and he still actually does to this day. Pride and arrogance, it was temporary, as God's eternal plan for saving mankind was revealed. Dear friends, I want to encourage you this morning to really hang on to the truth. God is still in control, and you and I, we can trust Him in any situation that is taking place in our life, even currently. We have to remember that He is always watching over us, but it's important that we use godly wisdom and watch our words carefully. Until next week, God bless you.